Hey guys, this is D.O.D, aka Dark Frozen Depths, back with another Kamihime project video. Now, this video is going to be a little bit different because it is a guide video on a specific soul instead of like a group of them. Because when it comes to the S3 souls, most of them are fairly straightforward to get an idea of. I know one that comes to mind is Cleo, where you might need to mess around with her a bit to learn how she works. But the biggest one is Beethoven, because the way she works is an immense list of different stuff. She is easily the most flexible soul in the game, possibly the most flexible character in the game, because of how her kit works. But that means you have a lot to understand about her if you really want to make the most out of her. So that's why she's getting her own soul video, and the other S3 souls will have a different one. But I do have to point out, some of this info is on my Discord, because there was info that was shared that the JP Wiki doesn't seem to have. So there's that. And I'm unsure if the English wikis have been updated, so I'm not using them for the time being. But anyways, before we even get into what all of these images are, the way Beethoven works is that whenever you use an ability that is not from her, it creates a melody, as in a note. And that note is the same color as the ability that the character used. So if you have, say, Thor on your team, and this is just an example because Thor is not that good of a character, if you want to be honest. But if you have someone like, say, Thor on a team and you use a red ability, it will generate a red note for Beethoven. But if you have someone like, say, Nefertum, and you use a blue ability, it generates a blue note. Beethoven can hold up to 3 of these notes at one time, and depending on the combination of notes, will give you one of these effects from her first ability right here, which is actually quite a lot of stuff. So that's the whole thing with that. But it also generates something called a sheet music, and the sheet music is needed for her second ability, her third ability, and technically the second ability does what the passive does. So that's a big thing to remember. So this is where I'm going to go over all the different stuff for that, because I can say this out the gate, you really need a lot of ability spam regardless of the setup to make the most out of Beethoven. There is possible teams where she can be on normal attack, burst, and especially abilities, like ability damage teams. However, you really need characters that can spam the crap out of their abilities. I'm talking ones that can reset their cooldowns, or maybe they can use their abilities every single turn, stuff like that. The more you can use in one single turn, the better, because the biggest thing about Beethoven, when she uses, like when she takes her turn, she will instantly use her notes and her sheets, meaning they will be gone at the end of the turn. You'll get a whole bunch of other stuff based on what you've done, but her notes have to be generated in that same turn. So she really emphasizes unloading on one single turn, and you can keep doing it throughout the fight as long as you keep having abilities to spam. So that's the main thing. Now then, going into her first ability, this is where we have to start paying attention to a lot of different stuff. If you have 3 red notes, the official name is melody for them. But if you have 3 red notes, as in 3 red abilities from other characters, and use her first ability, she will do 5 random hits to enemies. There is a damage multiplier 3.0, but it will go higher if you have elaborate weapons. And the soft cap is 400,000. This soft cap can be raised. Now, if you happen to have her weapon that increases her ability damage, and this is the HP weapon, by the way. Like, if you have the HP weapon and it increases her first ability, then the soft cap becomes 500,000, and it does a 6th hit instead of 5. Now, she uses if you have 3 yellow notes on her, then she will give chance of attacking a weak spot for all allies. It's basically Stinger buff. And it is 10% for 3 turns, and it goes in the stackable frame. But the activation rate, they don't have that. I do believe the activation rate was, I think, 20%, but I could be wrong. But I do know that could be on the JP Wiki, which we will check out later. So that's something to know. But also, it is a 20% Stinger multiplier if she happens to have her HP weapon. So that's what that is. If you use 3 blue notes, then she will randomly deal one of these debuffs listed right here on all enemies. Either normal attacks can't hit, which is the stronger version of blind. I do believe it's called shade. Possibility of not attacking, I'm not exactly sure if it is stun or dizzy, or even something like magic seal. But that's still useful for most fights that are early on. The later ones tend to have something that protects against it. Same thing for cannot perform any action. I do believe that might be the stun or the paralysis. But again, not every fight can actually withstand that. Or she will increase the maximum orb count by 1. Again, not every fight can actually do that, because there's a lot of enemies that are quite resilient to a lot of this stuff. So quite frankly, generating 3 blue notes isn't exactly good unless you're going for sheet music or the music scores, in my opinion. But who knows, it might actually help you out for some fights. Now, if you do 3 green notes, then all allies will get a 1,600 regen across 3 turns. So they'll get about, off the top of my head, close to 6,000 overall. But they also have their maximum heal increased by 20%, as in they gain 20% ascension. If you have her HP weapon, this is instead 50%. Now, as you notice, there is just straightforward color generations when it comes to the music scores for these. Like 3 red will make a red score, 3 yellow notes will make a yellow score, stuff like that. This is where it can get a little bit complicated with Beethoven, because this is where you get the other combinations that can create music scores. And what they will do, you have to use 3 different colors, but it will generate the color that you didn't use. So, as it is for this first one, if you use a blue, a yellow, and a green, it's going to generate a red score. And this will also deal an AoE hit on all enemies. It says twice. And the soft cap is 2 million. It's a multiplier of 7, but if you have the HP weapon, it's instead a multiplier of 10, and the soft cap is 3 million. And remember, this is the base soft cap, and the base multiplier. Elaborate will increase it. Now, if you use a red, a blue, and a green skill, you will generate a yellow music score, but all allies will also gain a critical hit of 30%. I do believe this is Keen, not Stinger. And there's a vigor buff that is, it says 42% basically. Both of those are for 3 turns. Now, the HP effect says the same thing, where it says 30% or more. I do believe it could be less without the HP weapon, but either way, for those that want to try and get some more Keen, this actually could be helpful. Plus, generating yellow music scores is helpful later down the line for the assist ability that we'll cover. Now, if you use a red, a yellow, and a green ability, it generates a blue music score. You also will get attack and defense down for all enemies, 10% per stack, and it is guaranteed to hit. If anybody has seen some of the videos I've done with Beethoven already, this is one of the ones I use because it actually helps out quite a bit. You may want to get 1 or 2 of these if you can, depending on your team comp. And if you use a red, a yellow, and a blue, you will gain a green music score, but you will also just flat out heal everybody for 1500 HP. It's 2000 if you have her HP weapon, so it's a little bit stronger. But this is all just from her first ability, and remember, her first ability, when used properly, will do this every 3 turns, like every 3 abilities. So you go red, 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 generate a red one, or you can go red, blue, green, and generate a yellow, and you can just keep repeating this. There's a little bit more with the first ability as well that isn't mentioned here, and what that does is give you 5 burst gauge every time she uses her first ability. It doesn't matter what you do. And if you happen to do a combination that doesn't generate any music scores, she will instead give a stackable ailment resistance to the entire team. But it is honestly the worst combination you can get. Always try to generate a music score if you can. But if you do happen to need like another fab burst gauge, you can use any 3 abilities and still get that. Now, the second ability, that will trigger what we're about to cover next, but it won't consume the notes or the sheets. And what these are is the passive effects from our second passive. The second ability will trigger these without consuming the notes, so technically you can get it twice in 1 turn. Now, these are all dependent on how many music scores she's created. So that's why you need to remember the combinations like red, blue, yellow, or green, 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 stuff like that. Generally, most people will try to generate as much red and yellow notes as they can in order to make these red and yellow sheets, but the blue ones are also pretty good if you can pull it off. Green is almost never used unless you're having a really, really defensive team, so keep that in mind. But there is a lot, as you can see here, and we're going to go through them all. First off, red music scores. For every red music score, all enemies take 6 hits of ability damage. Each hit has a soft cap of 300,000 and a multiplier of 4. This is very powerful because the most music scores you can have per any color is 5. That means every enemy can take up to 30 hits from this. And with things like damage plus, it is very good. If you happen to have her elemental weapon, then it's instead going to have a 5 times multiplier, and each soft cap starts at 350,000. Now, if anybody's wondering how I'm doing a lot of absurd damage, in some of my videos I'm doing 1 turn runs and whatnot, this is why. Because I spam a lot of red abilities on an ability team, and she just nukes the crap out of enemies for like upwards of hundreds of millions of damage. So this can be very powerful when used correctly, trust me with that one. Now then, the blue one is a little bit more complicated. You need to have a specific amount of blue music scores to even start activating these effects. But if you do reach a higher tier, you get all the previous ones as well. For instance, if you have 3 blue music scores, then you'll still do this, what it says right here, for 3 or more. But 1 and 2 will still activate as well. They'll just be stronger. This also carries over to yellow and green, so remember that. But starting off, just having 1 music sheet for blue, you'll give 1 stack of attack down and it's guaranteed to hit. This lasts longer than if you generated a blue sheet, so keep that in mind. But at the same time too, if you have, say, 5 sheets, then you're giving 5 stacks of this. It is equal to the number of blue sheets. Same thing goes for this 2 or more, where it will be defense down instead of attack down. But by the time you triggered this defense down, you've already got 2 stacks. So if you happen to have 5, maximum 5 blue music sheets, she will fully debuff enemies to the 50% cap, provided they don't have any buffs. So remember that. Now, if you've generated 3 blue sheets, all enemies will deal 30% less damage. And that will be for 4 turns. This doesn't increase based on your sheet count, however. 4 or more, you also will have her deal a magic seal to all enemies. And what magic seal does is prevent an enemy from using their overdrive or their burst effect, whatever you want to call it, but it's this thing with full orbs. So they can't use their full orb ability. And if you happen to have 5 sheets, it says or more, but the maximum is 5. But if you happen to have 5 sheets, then you will give every enemy 3 turns of normal attack and burst resistance. They will have that reduced. Now, if you happen to have the elemental weapon, the magic seal, and the 2 resistances will also be a little bit longer. But the key factor in all of this is that if you can somehow generate 5 blue music sheets, not only is the enemy having 50% defense down naturally, but they will also have 20% in the normal attack and burst resistance down. These act as defense debuffs that bypass the limit, so it technically is one of the few ways to go past 50%. So that is a 70% defense reduction against normal attacks and bursts. This is one of the very powerful effects you can get with Beethoven if you can pull it off. Now going into the yellow ones, this is more buff oriented as well. And there are some very powerful buffs here. Now starting off, just generating a yellow sheet, you will gain a stack of 10% attack and defense for all allies. It is for 4 turns. And on top of that too, it increases to 15% if you happen to have her elemental weapon per stack. So if you have max stacks, it will be 50% without the weapon, and with the weapon it will be 75%. So that's actually pretty powerful. At 2 stacks, burst gauge is going to increase by 10 for each stack, and it starts off at 20 because you've already gotten 2 sheets. It can go up to 50. But if you have her elemental weapon, it will instead be 15 burst gauge per stack, so you can get up to 3/4 of a full burst gauge for everybody. And remember, you're already generating sheets just to even pull this off. So you are guaranteed a full burst generation if you happen to use her second ability and you have 5 yellow sheets. You are guaranteed to have 100 burst gauge on everybody by then. Now, the third one, if you have 3 or more, it is normal attack performance up, ability performance up, burst performance up. All 3 will increase the multiplier and the soft cap by 10%, and it's stackable. By the time you're using this, you are already getting 3 stacks. By the time this can activate, you already get 3 stacks. It is 10% normally, 15% if you happen to have the elemental weapon. This is also very powerful, because imagine a 75% soft cap increase to all your damage, and a 75% multiplier increase to all your damage as well. And remember, it is also stackable, and it doesn't seem to have a limit to it as well. So if you use your second ability, and then at the end of the turn it goes off again, you've practically hit 150%, which is already well past the limit for abilities. Burst and normal attacks will be a little bit different though, because they have a certain sort of decay, but you can already tell it's very powerful. Now, in the case of 4 yellow sheets, you have a stackable attack damage plus, normal attack damage plus, ability damage plus, and burst damage plus. It is multiplied by the number of stacks, so you're already getting, by the time this can even activate, 200,000 added to every normal attack, 160,000 added to every ability hit. And remember, her red activations could be multi-hit. And then the burst damage plus will be 1 million by then. and you can get a 5th stack as well, and even just increase it further. Because again, her second ability acts like a dual cast for this passive. But the 5th one is where it can get very, very powerful, because you'll end up getting a 50% special attack up for all allies, and on top of that, it can't even be removed. But it is also for 3 turns. We are now hitting the era where you can actually start getting a lot better access to special attack up, and it is a pretty useful damage multiplier. This will really spike the damage of your normal attacks and bursts. When it comes to abilities, it's a little bit rougher, because abilities, they lose a lot of damage past the soft caps to where it may not even matter. But when it comes to bursts and normal attacks, this can be a very, very powerful tool. And finally, the green one. Most cases you will not be getting green sheets, but this is still something to keep in mind just in case, because it can give you some very absurd healing on some setups, and it might actually be a little bit worthwhile depending on the team. But with 1 sheet for green, it will increase the upper limit of her healing abilities. And it is 1,600 per sheet, or it is 1,800 per sheet whenever you have the elemental weapon. So this can actually be a pretty sizable heal just from this. Now, with 2 or more, all allies are going to recover from 2 debuffs. Always useful if you can get this off and you're debuffed, because quite a few of the harder fights will spam debuffs against you. Now, 3 or more, you may or may not end up triggering, depending on the team, but it still depends. But you will get a damage reduction of 25%, and this is in the C frame as well. So a lot of buffs tend to be A or B frame, which is a lot more common. C frame is a little uncommon. You'll also gain a 2,500 barrier as well, and it lasts until it's consumed, so there is no turn limit on that barrier. If you happen to have her elemental weapon, the damage cut is 30% and the barrier is 3,000. Now, if you have 4 or more green sheets, you flat out don't even take 1,000 damage. When combined with other defensive effects, this can actually be very useful. Then on top of that, you can absorb 2 debuffs as well. Remember, you're already removing 2, and then you're adding basically immunity to 2 of them. But this absorption should go to your burst gauge, so remember that. But the biggest thing is the fact that your defense goes up by 100%. And that is very, very strong. Now, with the elemental weapon, these passive effects will instead turn to 4 turns, and the damage reduction that you have is increased to 1,200. But this is where you can actually start getting a team with absurd heals if you pull this off. And this is 5 stacks of her green sheet. It will give everybody burst heal, trance drain, and it says sustain. Sustain is actually probably a regen, given from what it sounds like. But burst heal and trance drain are pretty useful because they tend to be cases where you'll just sit back and be able to heal whenever without cooldowns. So you're getting 3 more methods of healing. Everybody can do it. Burst heal will heal the team, as well as trance drain. Sustain should be the regen for only themselves. The burst heal is 800 per burst. The trance drain is 150 per normal attack, and the sustain is 300. But remember that if you already have it from somebody else, these will be canceled out. So you have to be a little bit careful if you ever do pull this off. And then on top of that too, remember that everybody on the team is getting this, so you're basically getting 5 times these amounts. Now, if you happen to have the elemental weapon, the duration is 5 turns instead of 4. But as you already see, this is quite a lot to remember, because these 3 things that I just covered right here, based on the number of music scores, is all from her passive. And it's also from her second ability if she happens to use that. But in the case of this one right here, this is from her first ability, and this is what you even use to make the sheets for the passive. Now, her third ability, we can go to the wiki for that one. So I will post that up here. And we'll even cover some of the other stuff she gets as well. But her third ability, it will reduce the cooldown on all allies. It says other than herself, but for right now, it will work on all allies, including herself. But it will reduce the ability cooldown on all your abilities based on the color of the sheets. So if you have 1 red sheet and 2 blue sheets, all your red abilities go down by 1 turn, all your blue abilities go down by 2. It is currently impossible, I do believe, to max out 3 colors, but even assuming if you could, that is upwards to 5 turns removed from the abilities of that color. This is also very, very powerful. But for the time being, if you want to do a little trick, you can use her third ability before her... You can use her second ability before her third ability. And that will make her third ability work on the second ability as long as you have at least 1 yellow sheet. So it will make it come back faster. This says 8 turns, but for right now, it is 6 turns. Because she does indeed get nerfed later on. And we'll cover that as well. But even with the nerf, she's still insanely strong when used correctly. Now then, as for a few things that is, as you can see, there's just a lot to remember if you really want to try to. But as for a few other things that you should consider as well, remember the staff, which looks like a conductor's wand, that's the elemental weapon. The piano is the HP one. The HP one works towards our first ability. The elemental weapon works towards our passive. But either one, if you have it, will lower her own abilities cooldowns whenever she bursts. So you do want to burst as often as possible with Beethoven so she can keep spamming like crazy. Now, when it comes to the balance changes, like I said, she gets nerfed. So there's a few things that you need to pay attention to. But it reduces the damage from what she gets from the red notes. It also will reduce her yellow note effects as well, to where they go to like 5 turns instead of 3 turns duration. It also reduces the effect of the stinger for playing 3 yellow melodies to make a yellow sheet. Then on top of that, her second and third abilities will go from 6 turns to 8 turns of cooldown. But like I said, even then, she is still very, very strong. So remember that. But also, whenever you go and acquire her and level her up, she's going to up her own ability damage as well as her own attack power as well. So that's something interesting for when it comes to the first ability, where you can use it and start nuking with red abilities as well. Because she can do a lot of ability damage. Compared to Edison, she will out-damage Edison. So that's something to know. And if you master her, you get 4% attack power. So there's that. Now then, one more thing. I'm going to go in the game as well, because that's something that I should cover. And in the case of in the game, this is what I suggest you do if you want to use her for her master points as well. But also keep in mind, to even unlock Beethoven, you need to have Medea and Edison. So that's something to know. But For her energy release, this is what I suggest you do. Although, if you want, you could lower some of the crit rate for her, which is Stinger, and probably put it to the triple attack. But usually she's not even used for normal attack teams. She can be, but you don't necessarily have to do that. But I went for the most damage output I can get out of her, so that means I've maxed out all these attack boosts for a lot of assault. This is 10%, this is 8%, and this is 6%. So that's already a lot of bonus assault. She's also getting a lot better burst, a lot better ability damage. Then she's also got a 20% chance of Stinger. This is my suggestion for her. If you do want to go a more defensive route, you can also load up on the HP and defense, so there's that. But I would never take stealth. And you may not need to put too much in a triple attack, but there you go. It's also here as well. And she currently does not have any abilities. I don't know if that's ever going to happen. We may see on JP's side later down the line, but at the time of this video, she doesn't have any extra abilities. But the big thing with Beethoven, again, you need ability spam, period. If you're trying to use her, don't ever try to use her with auto ability battle. It completely gimps her kit. You can use her with auto ability battle, but it's far more worth it to sit there and click on everything. That means you will have to do a lot of clicking to get the most out of her. And trust me when I say that, it can also mean that some fights could take a long time of clicking, but you also likely will do roughly a few turns or so. But even just to give a quick little example of just how she is, I won't go into something that's really heavy, but this is just something to go on camera for this. Now, if you're doing ability damage, I suggest you take a limited guardian if you have friends with that. Depending on how strong you are, you may end up instead going for something like this I don't want to have as under the green my support, or you could end up using this one right here where it's a catastrophe add-on. It really depends on your setup, but I'm going to go into this one, and this fight should not take that long. But my best suggestion for you is to try and use stuff that will cater to her. For instance, this team gets a specific number of red abilities to where I don't need to have Beethoven have another red ability, because Osiris, Och, and a 10, they have passes that based on the number of red abilities you use in the same turn. Beethoven won't contribute to that regardless, unfortunately. Maybe she could across multiple turns before a single turn comp. It's not helping me right now. Now, my suggestion, pay attention to the turn order you want to do. So in my case, I want to use this first, and this first. As you can see, I generated a yellow, a red, and a green. So the only color I didn't use is blue. That's the sheet music I should create. It gave me my attack and defense down stack, and then I also have a blue sheet for her. These sheets will disappear at the end of the turn. The notes will disappear at the end of the turn, so be careful with that. Now, paying attention to my resets, I tend to do this with 3 red. That way I can get a 10's ability back. Now for others, some noteworthy characters might be like Eve for Thunder, Amon's Heavily Awakening, the fire version of Bolinus. Those are just some examples. But as you can see, I did 3 red and it did 10 million damage. Right here. That's going to happen every time I use 3 red abilities. So, just to show it again, because I can do it right now. That's another red ability. And then I can just use these. And just to show an example of it too, you see that I currently have 3 red notes. That means no matter what abilities I use, I don't generate another note. So I can do something like this. And as you can see, I still have 3 red notes. You won't ever be able to have more than 3 notes. So pay close attention to that. Sometimes you may need to use it to your advantage to get your stuff to line up better. In my case, I didn't need to, but this fight's easy enough for me to just completely blow through it. Now this time I want to generate yellow notes to also get some of my red abilities set up as well. So I do 3 yellow right here. This is the big thing with Beethoven. You have to literally think and plan on your own just to try and optimize your teams. So as you can see, I have 1 blue sheet, 2 red, and 1 yellow. The official name is scores, but I also call them sheets because JP said sheet music. So I'm using more red, and let's go generate a 3rd sheet for red. And as I said, the number of sheets you have determines what the 2nd ability and the 3rd ability do. And it also affects what the amount passive does, but the passive is still what this 2nd ability triggers. So I'm going to use that first. This will add some debuffs to her, nuke her for a lot of damage, and give me some very solid buffs, just from what I got right here. So I got some attack and defense. Then on top of that as well, I just hit her for like 40 million damage, and then I add another stack of attack down. This is what I mean by that 2nd ability. Depending on when you use it, it can be a very powerful tool and just double cast everything. And as for this 3rd ability, my blue abilities went down by 1 turn, but I don't have any. My yellow abilities went down by 1 turn, that's why Lou got hers back. And my red abilities went down by 3 turns, which is why this came back. And then it also came back again because of a 10's passive. But this is what I mean about Beethoven. If you can learn how to truly manipulate your teams, she can do a lot of damage. And I've done some very insane damage with her already as is. Enough to take out quite a few fights in 1 turn, maybe even 2. So that is something to remember. If you're really skilled at what you're doing, you can easily dish out a crap ton of damage with her. And technically in this fight, I don't even need a turn, as you can see. But this is why I had to show it on camera, because Beethoven does take a bit of skill and knowledge to use. So she's pretty high maintenance, but as it is, she is very rewarding if you can use her correctly. This is the whole reason why a lot of people have pushed for Beethoven, because of the fact that she is very, very good when you can use her properly. Like, for example, I did this fight, I only used like roughly about half my abilities, and I didn't even use them properly. But I basically cleared that fight without even taking a turn, as you can see. Again, if you use her properly, she will give you a huge payoff. But anyways, that's all for this. More will come soon. Like I said, I will do guides of the other S3 souls, because their abilities are a bit more straightforward. The only one that may be a little bit confusing to people might be Cleo. But Cleopatra is still far easier to use than Beethoven, so that's why Beethoven has her own video. That's why I wanted to have her separate. But anyways, again, that's all for this. More will come soon, and take care.